Welcome to the ThinkData Podcast, and today's guest is Edmund Ben-Ami. He is the CEO of a really interesting AI startup called NeuraLight. They are using artificial intelligence and a simple webcam to radically improve how neurological diseases are measured. This all focuses around kind of eye tracking tech, and this is already powering clinical trials and is proving up to 10 times more sensitive than current tools in the market. We obviously have a few kind of shared connections in the space. And I know when I got the opportunity to get you on, I was really excited because the space you're in, obviously Israeli-based startup doing some phenomenal work in this space. But for the people that are listening here, what was the original vision? Because you've obviously got a really kind of maths heavy background, obviously, but coupled with that commercial aptitude as well, which is quite rare. So keen to dig on that. So when was the idea born, and how has that evolved over the coming years?
So first of all, thank you so much for having me here, Alex. And it's
Pleasure.
always super fun talking to you. And so as you said, I'm a mathematician by background, and all of my life, I was always interested in extracting insights and valuable data from very noisy and problematic sources of information. And, you know, that's the most exciting use of AI that I always find. And I think the beginning for me was when I found out that in the middle of the 21st century, the main tools used in neurology to assess deterioration of patients are still clinician intuition and how clinicians and patients perceive their own situation. And it literally blew my mind. Understanding that the only way to understand that whether it's a Parkinson patient or an ALS patient or a patient with depression or a psychiatric disorder, the main tool to understand that their situation is getting worse is either this is how they feel or that the physician that's taking care of them, when they look at them, they have the hunch that this is the case. So that was kind of the biggest I was shocked, and when I realized that, it was kind of clear that this is the thing I want to do in the many years to come.
Interesting. And talk me through that journey, because I know taking an idea is one thing, or having the idea, having the foresight. Obviously, you said the heavy data maths person coupled with this use case, you think that there's an issue here that needs to be sorted. But talk about that journey of then kind of assembling the founder team and then putting in place the building blocks for actually a business.
So first of all, it's the beginning was during COVID, so everyone was looking into changing the world and doing good things because everyone was stuck at home, and everyone wanted to do something positive. So in this sense, there were lots of very smart and very talented people that were interested in taking part, and in this sense, I'm really fortunate to both work with awesome people right now, but every single person from the beginning of the company all the way to now was super positive and had a huge impact on the way the company looks. I think it's interesting that you say the mixture between something that's more scientific and more commercial. We have something quite unique in NeuraLight, and that is that unlike standard AI companies where people usually say, okay, there is a problem that we want to solve. There is a big need in the world or in a specific industry. And now, we're just going to collect data, use AI, and find a way to improve the situation. Our situation was actually more interesting in the sense that the science that's behind what we do was already there. Science behind what we do is already there for over 50 years. And there is a lot of understanding amongst lots of people that do neurology, or throughout people from pharma and basic science, all the way to the people the clinicians in the field. The understanding that the potential is there is something that is kind of common. And it kind of felt like something is missing just to make everything work. So our goal in NeuraLight was to figure out where there is friction that needs to be removed and understand how we take all of this knowledge and all these possibilities from the lab and universities, which are doing a super important work, and turning this into something that works and connecting the dots and helping our clients feel comfortable with us connecting the dots for them. And that was kind of the challenge we were focusing on and are focusing on until now. And in this sense, it's a bit different than, scientific startups that need to invent lots of stuff. We kind of focus on the second half of making everyone feel comfortable with what we do, doing this in a really good way, making sure that the value for our partners is as clear and as close as possible, making everything tangible. So this is kind of the thing we're focusing on. But of course, there is lots of super cool scientists and clinicians that we're working with, and their work is super valuable. But our main focus is on what usually comes later, because we kind of had amazing people do all the start for us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It sounds like a lot of it's around the kind of the education piece. Obviously, the data's there, the smart folk are doing what they're doing, but you're connecting that, but obviously educating, whether it's research or pharma, on kind of the benefit that NeuraLight can bring them. And I'm keen to touch, for the non-technical listeners here, how would you describe NeuraLight in terms of the solution and kind of how it works in practice?
So, as you said, we are an AI-based platform, and what we do is we're measuring brain function and we're measuring neurological deterioration. And the way we're doing this is by extracting very accurate biological signals that reflect what's happening in the brain from eye movements that are measured using a simple video camera. So what happens is that patients are sitting really comfortably in a chair, just like you and me. They're staring at a tablet where some very simple, basic things are happening. And from their eye movements, throughout a process that takes less than 10 minutes, we are extracting measures that these are the things that I mentioned earlier, that are so deeply researched by science, like exactly understanding which kind of eye movement is related to which specific area in the brain and which disease and what it actually means.
Wow.
And that helps us assess both deterioration of patients that have Parkinson's or ALS or Huntington's disease or Alzheimer's on one hand, and on the other hand, just, deterioration of cognitive state of people that are healthy, because, all of us, you're much younger than me, but all of us in my age, we want to know whether, all the booze is kicking in and making us less sharp than we were. So that's kind of the main thing that we do. And the cool thing is that all this information that I mentioned before, which comes from dozens of years of research on monkeys, where because monkeys can be trained to look at red dots, follow them, and do stuff, the understanding of the relationship between these parameters, like how fast you react to a movement or how stable is your gaze when you stare at a specific point. So each of those measures is very, very well connected to specific brain areas and what it actually means. And we're just taking all of this science and making it very, very, very easy to use. So this is kind of the bottom line. And now, it's on us to build the data set that validates how accurate and how informative is what we do. And thanks to all the cool people that came before us, we just need to, do our job well, and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think, as I said at the introduction, doing some amazing kind of research-led work, but obviously in a space and using AI at its core as well. And I know a lot of people who are listening to here kind of, there's some nervousness, and rightly so, some reservation around AI, but AI really is the fundamental enabler for your company, which is great. And I'm keen to touch on your customers. So who are you typically working with? Am I right in thinking it's pharma, clinical trials? Is that typically who you'd be partnering with?
So overall, what our biomarkers do is that they allow to quantify how a patient situation is changing over time. So unlike biomarkers that are used to diagnose diseases, which is something that happens a lot, that, you want to figure out whether someone is starting to come up with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or whatever, what we're doing is when a patient is already diagnosed, then we're allowing to quantify how much their situation deteriorates. And what that actually allows is to quantify how much a neuroprotective drug, which is a drug that is supposed to slow down neurological deterioration or degenerative disease, how much a drug like that is actually slowing down the deterioration. And that actually is what tells you how much a drug works and in which situations. So it is helpful in drug trials where a pharma that has a lot of molecules that work on mice or in a petri dish, and they want to figure out whether these molecules are effective in slowing down a specific disease and on which kind of patients. So in general, in these drug trials before, they would use these primitive methods I mentioned before. They would push a patient to test how well their balance is, or ask an ALS patient how many pillows they need to sleep well. These are actual questions that are used to measure how efficacious a drug is in a drug trial, which is insane. So on one hand, we can help companies quantify how much a drug is effective, and then later on, when a drug is actually being used with patients, we can help understand faster which drug would help a specific patient the best. So even today, we already have, so in some neurodegenerative diseases like multiple sclerosis, there are quite a lot of medications that help patients, and the main challenge there is to understand which drug would be perfect for a patient in a specific state. And just like any of those horrible diseases, you can't just give all the patients the most aggressive drugs from the start, because these are drugs that have lots of side effects and they have other problems as well. And you need to really understand what to do. And of course, if you can't measure how much a drug is helpful for a patient, then you don't know if you need to move up to the more aggressive drug. So our place in the world is throughout the whole process, all the way from helping pharma companies find new treatments to all these diseases, and then when you have a treatment, to figure out which treatment helps a specific patient the best. And then, overall, we also want to help just healthy people understand where they stand and how their situation is in general.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So tackling that drug development piece or the effectiveness of drug treatment, but then all equally trying to get ahead of it by actually diagnosing or helping people understand potential symptoms. And obviously, you think back to that kind of those initial conversation. What are some of the biggest kind of hurdles that you've had to overcome in that time? Because obviously, working with pharma is one thing, but obviously, there's so much money is spent on deploying and developing drugs. You're coming in and effectively not so much challenging it, but saying, it may not be as effective as we were hoping. So how are you talking about those kind of some of those early stage conversations? How are they to deal with?
So first of all, just to give everyone a context, so about 99% of drug trials in neurology fail. So when you talk to a pharma company, then the one thing that you don't need to work hard on is convince them that they are in trouble, and the fact that they cannot really assess whether a drug is working is something that they totally understand is their big problem.
Why
And
is
because
that?
everyone thinks
Why is that? Why is that?
so. I think historically, medications in neurology were focused mainly on solving symptoms. So it was a little bit like when you have a headache, then if you can have a pill that's going to make the headache go away, that's great. So as long as everyone was focusing on finding medications that will solve symptoms, then assessing a patient by just accounting the severity of all of their symptoms was exactly what you need, because you say, okay, I have a Parkinson patient. Everything I care about is how bad they suffer from everything they suffer from. And I give them levodopa, and I want to see after an hour how much of this is disappearing. And that was great. And all of these measuring methods were all based on the fact that everyone was looking for medications that a patient would get, and then after an hour would just change everything. The problem is that with time, we learned that this is not the real solution we're all looking for. And what we should be looking for is medications that are gonna slow down the underlying process that neurological patients are going through. And when you need to do that, you need to have good ways of just assessing this process. The thing is that the only two tools that we usually have in situations like that is either assessing symptoms, which is just not good as a measurement over time. It's way too crude. And the other one is all the things that are around imaging. And the problem there is that imaging methods are very good for acute processes. If someone, God forbid, has an aneurysm or a stroke or a tumor, then these are things that are very acute and happen in a short period of time and cause a very large structural change. And that is something that you can just see with an MRI or a PET scan or sometimes a different kind of imaging. Degenerative processes like degeneration, like what happens in Parkinson's, which is the degeneration of a specific area in the brain, or ALS, which is the degeneration of another area in the brain, then these are very slow and very long ongoing processes. And imaging is just not accurate enough to see that without waiting for a very long time, because you're actually measuring things like, okay, you want this specific part of the brain, like the basal ganglia in the Parkinson case, for instance, you need it to shrink enough so that you can see the change in volume in MRI. And you don't expect the shrinkage to be so large that it's going to be so easily visible. So in a way, because we moved in the last few years to a place where we're literally looking for drugs that are going to slow down this very slow but horrible process, we are in a place where people are looking for the molecules, but we still don't have a solution on how to measure this process in an accurate enough way.
Yeah.
And in this sense, this is exactly what we came to do. So we decided to focus only on this kind of measurement, of measuring the change. And on one hand, eye movements were a great beginning of a process like that, because eye movements are extremely complex and they cover almost every part of the brain. So on one hand, you have like a very good measurement that's general and gives lots of information. On the other hand, it is a measurement of function and not of structure, because, and in general, even just in everyday life, you know that function is something which changes much faster than structure. You know, when you feel pain or it's difficult for you to do something, just, you know, when you have something with a muscle, then you're going to feel something is wrong way before a test that measures structure is going to see it. So in this sense, eye movements were clearly the solution, and we just needed to find a way to turn this into something that's useful. So when we talk to pharma companies, they completely understand why we solve the pain that's bothering them. They understand the potential because they understand what we're measuring in the sense of the mechanism and what exactly we're measuring physiologically. It makes everyone feel very comfortable because it's not a black box.
Yeah.
And then the other part was just a work that we've been doing in the last 4 years, which is lots of validation to create enough data to make everyone feel comfortable with both what we say that we can do and understand what they can expect, and have the, you know, the, in order to feel convenient with using this as a tool that is making decisions that are important for all of us.
No, I really like that. Is it? I'm guessing, because I got a family member in drug development in pharm, that it's a long process, right, to develop a drug and get it to the market. In terms of the world that you live in, so obviously, you know, the data collection, as you say, getting all the validated data points to then speak to these pharma companies. Are you beginning to see much feedback coming through now from those pharma companies, or what does that kind of timeline look like?
So first of all, we are all happy that pharma companies don't move anywhere without having enough data to convince them that everything is, you know, exactly the way you would want it to be.
Yeah.
Because none of us would want. It's nice
No.
to have fast processes, but none of us wants these processes not to be as accurate and as well informed as possible. Because what we do is measuring change over time of patients, then our validation process was like the biggest part of the validation process was to follow patients for long periods of time. It can be a year or 2 years, and show how our markers change, how the change is related to the clinical standard measures, how much more accurate we are. And I think you mentioned our like really big milestone, that is paper that we submitted a while ago and is going to be published in a few weeks with the authors of the current gold standard in Parkinson's. So they're co-authors in our paper that demonstrates that we are about 10 times more sensitive to progression of Parkinson's than the current gold standard. And this is the kind of results that, you know, when you have less data, then you only have indication that these things might work. And the more validation and proof you have that these things work makes pharma companies feel more comfortable, both to just make the decision of using us, but also more comfortable with leaning on our results more and more. And this is something that, it took time. It only in the last few months, we got to a place where we have many pharma partnerships. And I guess that in a few months where the drug trials that we're currently part of together with our partners are going to conclude, and we can be part of actually getting exciting results. That's going to be an even higher validation milestone.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. And that's why I asked the question, because I think it's always nice to get that kind of continual feedback. But in your world, it's actually, you rightly say, you don't want a drug coming onto the market with rush, do you? Unless we got to kind of COVID, where the treatment was a global effort, where actually that was fantastic. I think on the longer term generative diseases and stuff, that drug development life cycle needs to be long and concise, or, we'll be in a world of pain. But if you look at kind of the next few years, and I know AI is absolutely core to your product here, how would you have done this without AI? Would NeuraLight just not exist, or would it have been a different, complete process behind? Because the reason I'm asking the question is, people look at AI and especially in drug treatment or like healthcare and diagnosis, and there is still that nervousness around AI hallucinations and data quality. But take AI out and NeuraLight, where would you have been as a company?
So I think, like everything, first of all, I 100% agree with everything you say, in the sense that it's like everything in life, it's complicated.
Yeah.
And on one hand, we do want to be careful, and we want to make sure that we feel comfortable with each step and we know what's going on. On the other hand, if we're going to be too careful, we're just still going to be... I'm sure it was very scary when the first person that discovered the fire, if they would say, well, this is really scary, let's not tell anyone, we wouldn't get very far.
Yeah.
So it's like, we need to kind of balance the risk and the reward of the process. And I think in this sense, NeuraLight is a great example. So on one hand, we just talked about how huge is the need and how badly neurology needs tools to be able to make better decisions. Because, it's horrible that there are so many diseases like Huntington's and Alzheimer's and psychiatric diseases that don't have good solutions yet. And it's not because of lack of effort or money or amazing science that gets into it, right? So on one hand, there is this huge problem. And on the other hand, even though understanding that in theory, eye movements are the thing with the highest potential to be a solution, it just stayed in academia because it was not really feasible to use this process as something that you just deploy and measure patients with. Because in the past, what happened, just like with a lot of these AI solutions, you just needed to be a super awesome eye movement neuroscience specialist to be able to read out the solutions, not to mention that you needed a huge lab and lots of machinery, and you needed to test patients for like a huge amount of time to get accurate measurement.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can do this so easily, first of all, means that you can collect a lot of data. Currently, we have the data NeuraLight collected is more than 90% of the eye movement data in clinical setting that exists right now. And the reason for that is that because thanks to AI, we can do these measurements really easily and very fast. So we just can deploy this and measure lots of patients. And without measuring lots of patients, you cannot have validation. And without validation, you cannot turn this into something that's useful. And in a way, even though everyone was like, yeah, we think that this has lots of potential and it's going to be great, but no one really understood how you just, make this actually work. And I think in this sense, AI is a great, this is a great example of how AI is useful, in the sense that all of these things, and there are lots of those in human life, that the only way to properly do is give a super specialist do that, but you don't have that many of them, and it's not scalable and it's not really useful. And those are places where if we use AI carefully, then we can actually turn something from a proof of feasibility, which is something that many times happens already in the academia, into something that's actually useful. Of course, that means that you have additional problems that you need to resolve, and you need to make things way more reliable and make sure that they're really robust. And it's great. This is why people like us have work, and we don't just wave the wand of AI and say, great, so we're done and we're going to drink Mai Tais on the beach. But without having this set of capabilities, it would just never happen. And the bottom line is that it allows us to both collect very large amounts of data and crunch through very large amounts of data, which humans just cannot.
No, and also on that point, it kind of frees up those super specialists to do more but better work, doesn't it? Because ultimately you're providing them with that platform, that tooling, that the data, the clean insights for them to go away and do that work. Because you're right, with that AI, I think it's the time, isn't it? The inefficiencies associated with what AI brings you. You know, it really does make things. It's not as you said, it's not the one to make everything magic, is it? But actually, in the right hands, I think it really can do life-changing work.
Yes. Also, everyone that's worried about AI, and for really good reasons, and because you really do need to do lots of validation work and understand the statistics and it's a tool that you need to understand how you're using and how you're using it well. But the things that we did before was to base everything on doctors and physicians, and whether it is neurologists or in other areas, would perceive things. It's not that we didn't have ways before to jump to conclusions. The way to jump to conclusions in the past was that a physician would see a few hundreds of patients throughout their entire life, and they would come up with an idea that they're sure is correct. And the chances of an idea like that to be correct or not are similar to the questions around whether an AI has a good or a bad idea. And we still need to do the validation, but all of a sudden, instead of gambling on the fact that a physician that saw a small number of cases got it right, we can do things in a more robust and organized way. Of course, you can still make mistakes and you can do a bad job, but in general, the rule is it's always better to do a good job. It's always bad to do a bad job, and it's always better to be smart, and it's bad to be stupid, and everyone should be trying to do their best.
Yeah, no, I like that. And what's next for you? Because obviously you had this amazing journey over the last 3-5 years of where this kind of the idea, the concept, you've got these clients, you're beginning to get that feedback loop, you're doing the white papers, you're doing the gold standard reports. What's next over the next couple of years? And what are you going to hope to see to kind of put that flag in the ground and go, yeah, we've really come a long way here?
So I think we were always open about the fact that we want to be the new gold standard. So in the future, we want to be not a tool that's used in adjacence to these assessments and just helps make more informed decisions, but actually the measurement that's the one measurement that everyone trusts and uses when they need to decide how the patient is deteriorating. And to get there, so we have the steps that are happening in the next couple of weeks. So we have the paper on Parkinson's with Professor 𝐃𝐨𝐧'𝐭 and Professor 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐵𝐾, which is very exciting. And we have a few more of those coming up in the next few months. I think a little bit longer, in like more months than we expect, to start seeing exciting results that are enabled by our biomarkers from all the ongoing drug trials in partnership with all our amazing pharma partners. And even longer term is just, in the end, we need to have a critical mass of results and a critical mass of these trials where our marker both behaved the way everyone expected and allowed all these things that we're hoping for such a long time. And, on one hand, I dream for us to be part of actually finding meaningful new treatments for all of these horrible diseases on one hand. And on the other hand, the more of this data we collect, the more we're making our journey into becoming a more standard tool and not just an additional tool that people use just to be more informed.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's becoming the gold standard, becoming the norm as opposed to the exception. And actually, when you hit that point, obviously then and then a lot of other people follow suit. You've got more people in your market. You've got everyone adding to this space is only going to make ultimately the patients put them in better hands.
Yes, exactly. In the end, the cool thing is that everyone in this industry wants to do their best, and the people are looking at things differently in the sense that some people are more open to new methods, and some people are actually a little more conservative and waiting to see more examples of something working before they're willing to, take the leap on their own. And in the end, I think it's great that we have such a diversity of opinions and diversity of possibilities, because that is what increases the chance that once we have a solution that everyone uses, it's going to really be something that was the best thing that we could have gotten. And that's great, because we want to have the best solution possible. And because in the end, we're all going to end up neurological patients in whether it is 20 or 50 years. So we all want everyone to do their best. And, we're doing our small share in this process.
No, I love it. Look, thanks so much for coming on. Obviously, I wish you and NeuraLight, the best of luck. And I think it's you've come so far in it's relatively quite a short period of time. And for people listening here, check out NeuraLight, check out Edmund. They're doing some really life-saving work. So thanks so much for coming on. It's been really interesting.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex. It was really, really awesome being here.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.